After entering the room, they heard a loud noise from outside. With a serious look, she told him that this sound was coming from the same direction Protagonist had gone. Upon hearing this, Soldier's expression changed drastically. With a worried look, he started wondering what was happening. She knew that something bad was happening, so she decided to take a look first. She ordered him to stay here watching over and protecting the others, but he refused and told her that he also wanted to go with her. At the same time outside, all the zombies got out of the truck and started moving towards Protagonist. Steel Teeth couldn't help but burst into laughter while he calmly stand there. When Steel Teeth looked at her, he told him that she was his classmate. If he wanted to save her, then he would give him a chance to be a hero and save her. He just has to beg him on his knees. With a thoughtful look, he told that saving her was not impossible. Upon hearing this, she told him in agony, kneel before Steel Teeth as soon as possible and save her. With a calm look, he began to stare into Fang Qing's eyes and explained that there was a problem. Upon hearing this, she became somewhat confused and disappointed at the same time. She asked what the problem was and also if he wasn't going to save her. She reminded him that he had just clearly said that he would save her. She lost her composure, started staring at him, and couldn't help but explode in anger since he was the one who had said he would save her. She asked him how he could change his mind so quickly, and also if he still considered himself a man, adding that it was the duty of gentlemen to save ladies. With a murderous look, Su Chen responded to her that he indeed was a man but didn't deserve to save her. After saying this, he mocked her by asking if she wanted him to help her contact the gentlemen living abroad and see if they were willing to save someone like her. Girl became even more furious and soon realized that he was getting back at her for telling him he was wrong in front of everyone in the girls' dormitory. She started staring at him and began shouting, asking him why he was seeking revenge on her for such a small thing. In the blink of an eye, she completely lost her composure, screaming and asking him if he thought she would apologize to him and beg humbly for his help. She vented by telling him that reality proved he was a complete loser, adding that she didn't need the help of a loser like him. He couldn't help but feel happy. He began to look at her, pointing his finger at her, and with a smile asked her to remember her own words later. Little by little, the zombies started approaching the girl. Upon feeling the presence of the zombies, she slightly turned her head back. At that moment, her expression changed drastically. With a look full of fear, she began to wonder what was happening. The zombies approached her and slowly began to devour her, starting with her legs. Due to the pain, she opened her mouth and started screaming in agony. She couldn't help but ask for help and regret mocking him. Steel Teeth stared at him intently, pointing his finger at him. Seeing that he was a ruthless person who didn't help others in times of danger, Steel Teeth thought he was a very interesting person. He decided to stop thinking about it since soon he would end up like her anyway. He decided it was time to show him the technology of their evolution base. With a crazy look, he took out a jar of powder from his pocket, removed the cap, and began to paint his face with the powder, explaining to him that if someone applied this powder on their body, then the monsters would obey and treat them as one of their own. He wasn't even slightly surprised. With a calm look, he asked Steel Teeth if applying bone ashes on the body could really make them believe that one belonged to the same species as them. Upon hearing that the powder was actually bone ashes, Steel Teeth brought the jar closer to his face, started staring at the powder, and couldn't help but sweat and panic. Quickly, he put away the jar and began to move away, thinking that this was disgusting. He gave the order to all the drought demons to attack Protagonist until they tore him apart and made him into pieces. Upon hearing his command, all the drought demons gained momentum and began advancing quickly towards him. Once the monsters got close enough, he decided it was time to finish them off. At that moment, 2 swords that he had stored in the dimensional space appeared in his hands. He began to advance rapidly towards the drought demons. Using his swords, he cut their bodies into pieces. After finishing them off, he landed on the ground. He supported himself with one knee and one hand on it, dropping a sword in the process which got stuck in the ground. He extended his other hand towards the sky with a killer look. Steel Teeth wiped the bone ashes from his mouth. While he was cleaning his mouth with his hand, he began to turn his head back and think how dare the protagonist play with him before dying. He approached the truck and started staring at Steel Teeth. Once he turned his body back and saw him, he couldn't help but be shocked and wonder how he had gotten here. At the same time, they began to follow the trail of the drought demon's sound. They couldn't help but be shocked. Seeing so many drought demons, they became terrified. They began to look at the drought demons with a fearful gaze and couldn't help but sweat and feel afraid. They didn't know where so many zombies had come from. In the blink of an eye, drought demons completely devoured Girl's lower body. Drought demons surrounded him. Steel Teeth, who was on top of the roof, extended his hand to the sides and remained silent. When looking more closely, Steel Teeth saw that all the zombies were still standing there. Upon seeing this, he couldn't help but get angry and ordered them all to attack Protagonist while he was wiping his shirt with his hand. He started looking at Steel Teeth and calmly asked him to stop shouting since it was pointless. Upon hearing this, he was shocked and started looking at zombies with a confused look, asking him what he was talking about. The reality was that he had already finished off all the drought demons. He asked to Steel Teeth with calm composure why he was wasting his energy in vain. Upon seeing that all the zombies had been defeated, he couldn't help but be shocked. With a surprised look on his face, he began to wonder what was happening and how this could be possible. At that moment, he opened the space portal, then appeared behind him. He stared at him intently and explained that originally, he didn't want to mess with the people from the evolution base. Upon hearing Protagonist's voice, his expression changed drastically. With a confused look, he began to wonder what was happening, or grabbed Steel Teeth by the metal mask with both hands and asked him who had sent him to kill him. Due to fear of what his superiors could do to him, he decided not to reveal anything to him. Upon seeing this, he decided that he couldn't let him live. He tightly grabbed Steel Teeth's head with both hands. He couldn't help but sweat and panic. He started looking at him, asking him what he was trying to do. He stared into his eyes with a smile. Seeing this, it didn't take long for him to realize what he was about to do. He tightly grabbed his head and began to exert force, causing intense pain to Steel Teeth, who couldn't help but scream in agony. Due to the strength with which he was pulling Steel Teeth's head, gradually his head started separating from his body. In the blink of an eye, Su Chen ripped off his head along with his spine. Upon seeing this scene, General couldn't help but be terrified and speechless. She was unable to believe that Protagonist had finished all the zombies in an instant. She remembered that this had happened before and thought that it couldn't be achieved just by exercising. Thinking this, she couldn't help but wonder what kind of monster he was. While holding Steel Teeth's head in hand, he told her to pay more attention to the people in the girls' dormitory. He also added that it would be great for him to have a competent assistant. At the same time in the Green City Hotel, sunrays began to enter the room where head chef was sleeping. She started blushing as she was having an erotic dream. Several seconds later, she opened her eyes and called out to Protagonist with her mouth wide open. Still half asleep, she sat up and asked him not to leave her alone. She sat down, placed both hands behind her on the bed, opened her legs, started looking towards the bed and couldn't help but blush even more. She dreamed of Protagonist again. She didn't know why he hadn't returned yet. She turned her head to one side and began searching for him. At that moment, she remembered his words. A few days ago, when she was with him, with a serious look on his face, he asked her if she wasn't useful, then what right did she have to stay by his side? With a determined look, she decided to do something about it and not be a burden to him. She picked up the gun he had left on the table. She wanted to be his right hand. At that moment, she began to hear a sound. She filled herself with courage, left his apartment, and started searching the other hotel rooms. She grabbed the gun and forcefully opened the door. This apartment was actually an office. Upon closer inspection, she saw that there was no one inside, but this was very strange since the sound clearly came from here. At that moment, she heard the same sound coming from the area behind her. With a frightened expression, she slowly began to turn her head backwards. Upon seeing what had appeared, her expression changed drastically. With a surprised and confused look, she started wondering when this had happened. Behind her was a drought demon which suddenly appeared in front of her. She went into shock and couldn't help but fear. Slowly, drought demon began to approach her. She didn't let go of the gun, and silently, little by little, she started walking backwards. With a surprised look, she began to wonder when this zombie had appeared behind her. After taking several steps back, her butt hit with the edge of the wooden table that was behind her. While sweat was dripping from her face, she slightly turned her head to the side, and upon seeing a wooden table behind her, she panicked and thought that this was not good. She had no escape. She remembered that she still had the gun. Thinking this, she decided to use it to eliminate the drought demon. She tightly grabbed the gun and slowly began to lift it, but at that moment, it hit with the chair next to her. Quickly, she was moving her hand. The gun fell out of her hand and started rolling across the table. She slowly turned her head back, and upon seeing this, her expression changed drastically. With a terrified look, she thought that there was no escape left. Upon hearing the sound of the gun rolling across the table, with a penetrating gaze, Drought Demon began to approach her. He opened his mouth, started roaring, and prepared to attack her. Upon seeing this, she thought she was dead. She brought her hands close to her melons and prepared herself to receive the drought demon's attack. But luckily, instead of attacking her, he took a strong bite out of the chair next to her. Several seconds later, he stopped biting the chair. He turned his head towards her and began smelling her fragrance. Upon seeing that drought demon had not attacked her, she opened one of her eyes, and upon realizing that it was sniffing her, she began to wonder what was happening and what this drought demon was doing. She immediately placed her hands on the table, spread her legs, and started leaning back to avoiding drought demon. He opened his nose and began to smell even more strongly. Head chef turned her head towards him. Upon seeing this, she began to wonder if he had been smelling with his nose the whole time. She came to the conclusion that he couldn't see anything. Upon seeing this, she thought she had narrowly escaped from here. At that moment, the monster started following her fragrance and began getting closer to her. While she still had her legs on the ground, she lay down on the table, turned her head to one side, closed one eye, clenched her teeth tightly, and being so close to the monster, she couldn't help but sweat. He was too close to her, which means he would react to any sound she made. She started thinking about what to do. Drought Demon opened his mouth and slowly approached the fragrance. She climbed onto the table, extending her hand towards the gun, with a hopeful look in her eyes. She thought that as long as she had a weapon, she would be able to defeat the monster. Her hand reaching for the gun to grab it, but unfortunately, it was too far away. Despite this, she was not willing to give up. She extended her arm as much as she could. In the end, she got tired, and her arm hit the table. At that moment, Drought Demon finally realized that there was someone nearby. Upon hearing the sound, Drought Demon began to attack. With an aggressive look, she saw her death before her eyes. She began to look at him with a terrified gaze and thought that this was not good. At that moment, the only thought that came to her mind were memories of Protagonist. A few days ago, he explained to her that his resources were limited, so he couldn't just stay with her because she was cute. He closed his eyes and explained to her that if she found the crystal that was inside the Drought Demon's head, then she would obtain powers. He turned his head towards her with a serious look. He told her that he didn't want garbage around him. She clenched her teeth tightly and decided not to be a loser. Just before Drought Demon could attack her, she put her leg in front, stabbing Drought Demon's eye with the heel, causing intense pain. She drove the heel with such force that the tip came out through its head. While she had her body leaning on the table, she forcefully drove the heel into Drought Demon's head. Then she started staring at him with a look full of hatred, clenched her teeth tightly, and began moving the heel from side to side to cause even more damage. Several seconds later, she pulled the heel out of the monster's eye, and due to intense pain, he opened his mouth and started screaming in agony. She again tried to attack the Drought Demon's head, but at that moment, he moved at high speed and grabbed her foot tightly with his hand. Upon seeing this, her expression changed drastically. She started staring disdainfully at the Drought Demon and couldn't help but get angry. She didn't know how he was still alive if she had pierced its skull with the heel. She became furious and started repeatedly stabbing the monster in the eye with her heel again, causing it to open its mouth and scream in agony once more. She pulled her heel out of the monster's eye, causing its body to start falling backwards. The very next moment, he turned his head to one side due to the pain, fell to his knees on the ground. Head chef at the table placed both hands on top, while watching as his body slowly fell to the ground. She breathed a sigh of relief. There was a fire axe in the office. She thought it was a shame because if Protagonist had seen her doing this, he would have thought that she wasn't a loser. The very next moment, the Drought Demon fell to the ground and lost his life. Head chef grabbed the axe with her hand, rested it on her shoulder, approached it, put her foot on his head, started staring at it with a serious look, and decided to check if it was true that Drought Demon had a crystal core in their head. That same afternoon, at the engineering university, General followed Protagonist's order and began organizing the evacuation of the students. General specifically contacted her brother to bring his army and join her in protecting the students, her brother wondering if they should really listen to this Protagonist. At the same time, in the reptile biology laboratory, the snake that he was very interested in, ready to mutate. Several hours later, he went to the laboratory and took the snake out of its cage, and it raised its head and started staring at him intently. He approached the snake with a serious look on his face, deciding to see how far it could mutate. He decided to prepare a large bucket specifically for this purpose. He filled a large bucket of water and placed it near the table where the snake was. Just before he could make a move, the snake started approaching the bucket of water, sticking out its tongue and looking at its reflection. He quickly realized that it also knew it had to enter the water to complete the mutation. Seeing this, he thought that it had saved him from having to do it himself. The snake began to put its head inside the water bucket, and little by little its body started to mutate and grow bigger. With a murderous look, Snake opened its mouth. Its teeth were much larger and sharper. The snake slowly began to put its entire body inside the bucket. In the very moment, its whole body started to mutate, and the bucket gradually began to break. He was staring at the snake with a surprised look, couldn't help but feel somewhat confused and wonder what was happening. Now the snake completely mutated, causing the water bucket to explode. He put his hand near his face and began to wonder what was happening. The snake that was once just an ordinary snake has now transformed into a giant snake. Snake opened its mouth and started staring at him. While his body was emitting a suffocating and powerful energy, he began to approach the snake. He dropped his arms to the sides, and upon seeing that it had grown so much with just an initial mutation, he couldn't help but feel relieved. Fortunately, he had only given the snake a bucket of water. If a flood came and it entered the water, then it would grow and mutate even more. He pulled out a sword from the system's inventory, stared intently at the snake, and told it that if it obeyed him, then he would consider having it as a pet. The snake knew it had no chance of winning against him, so just before he could finish speaking, the snake gathered momentum and started heading towards the laboratory window to escape the area. While holding the sword with one hand, he placed his other hand near his face, and upon seeing that the snake was trying to flee, he was somewhat surprised. With a surprised look, he began to watch as it slowly made its way towards the window, and didn't take long to come to the conclusion that it had developed intelligence thanks to mutation. The snake decided to escape from the area. It broke the laboratory window, opened its mouth, and with a penetrating gaze, started descending towards the ground. But for its bad luck, he was not going to let this happen. He gathered momentum, took a leap, went outside through the window, and started following it. He grabbed the sword with both hands, started staring at the snake intently, clenched his teeth tightly, and began to question if this was what they called snake movement, but it was a pity for him because its speed wasn't fast enough. In the blink of an eye, he approached it and forcefully stabbed the sword into the snake's body. But to his misfortune, the blade of the sword broke as soon as it made contact with its skin. He began to look at its scales and couldn't help but wonder what was happening. He approached the broken sword, looked at the blade, and with a confused expression began to wonder why the snake's scales were so hard. While he was lost in his thoughts, the snake took advantage of this and in the blink of an eye approached him, opened its mouth, started staring at him intently, and with a murderous look prepared to attack. Just before the snake could attack, he moved at high speed and swiftly moved to one side, dodging the attack in the process. He extended a hand towards the ground, clenched his other fist, and prepared to attack. Now that the sword didn't work against the snake's scales, with a serious look on his face, he decided to kill it using only his fists. Just before it could make a move, he delivered a strong punch to its head, causing its body to forcefully collide with the ground, shattering it into pieces in the process. As he was in mid-air, the snake's body began to coil around him. He turned his head to one side, and upon seeing this, became somewhat confused and started wondering what was happening. Just before he could move away and do something about it, the snake coiled its body around him, trapping him and rendering him immobile. He clenched his teeth tightly, turned his head to the side, started looking at the snake's scales, and with a surprised look, thought that he was trapped. It didn't take long for him to come to the conclusion that this snake was very clever. After wrapping its body around him, the snake began to stare at him and move closer. He turned his head to the side, and upon realizing that it was approaching, he simply remained silent and realized that the previous attack had only been a distraction and that its true objective was to make him lose focus in order to trap him. Now that he couldn't move, the snake approached him, opened its mouth, and prepared to deliver the final blow. As it slowly approached, he simply turned his head to the side and started looking at the ground. At the same time, General and her brother finally evacuated all the students while they were walking in the area. Her brother slightly turned his head back and saw that she was still looking around. With a worried look, he asked his sister if something was bothering her, and also if she was worried because she didn't want to leave that handsome boy behind. General, who had her hands on her waist, turned her head to the side, and with a serious look explained to him that no one would take him for a fool if he didn't speak. Turned his body towards her, and with a serious look asked her if she really liked him so much. He also added that if he stayed here, then he would be doomed to die. General turned her head towards him, and with a serious look, she told him that Protagonist was not going to die. Upon hearing this, he asked her if she was sure. She approached him, started staring at him intently, and explained that the first time she saw Protagonist, she realized he was strong to her. His deep eyes were mysterious and unfathomable like a beast. She was convinced that they were going to see each other again. At the same time, outside the laboratory where the fight between Protagonist and the mutant snake was taking place, He activated his powers and began reaching out towards it. Just before it could attack him, he grabbed Snake by the neck and started strangling it. As a result, the snake loosened its grip. He began to stare at the snake and asked if it really believed it could catch him this way. He had heard that snakes' nerves were highly developed. Even if their heads were cut off, they could still bite people. He asked what would happen if this didn't happen. Upon hearing this, the snake couldn't help but panic. He tightly grabbed Snake by the neck and with tremendous force began to twist its body from side to side, causing it to collide with the buildings that were around. Due to this, the snake began to lose consciousness. Then, with a serious look, he forcefully struck its body against the ground. In a very moment, Snake lost its life. He approached it, put his foot on its lower jaw, grabbed the upper part with his hand and exerting some force, split its body in half. He took a small crystal from the snake's head, while his body was emitting a powerful energy. He brought the crystal close to his face. With a serious look, he decided to see what kind of powers it could give him. If you enjoy the video, so please subscribe the channel and like the video.